Salman Rushdie is here. His latest book is called The Moor's Last Sigh. It is third in a cycle that began with Midnight Children and the Satanic Verses, and I'm pleased to have him back on this program for a conversation about this book, about the themes, and about his life, which could not have been easy over the last number of years. But it's a pleasure to have him back. Welcome.
Thank you. It's nice to be back.
It was a little bit easier to arrange this than it was the last time that we came together with a series of things that we had to do in the interest of security.
Yes, so. Well, I think that's a kind of indication of the fact that I'm just trying to get things back on the road here.
How close are you to some sense of feeling?
Well, I mean, I'm pretty close, you know. I mean, I feel most of the time as if I can get things done now in a way that was previously very difficult. And actually, having the novel come out, it has in some way, I mean, in some mysterious way, it's changed the air, you know, and suddenly the Satanic Verses feels really like a long time ago, and people want to talk about books again, and it just seems to have cleared up something.
Yeah, so you can move on to the subjects. Do you think, I want to come to all the themes here, did it take a toll on you other than the obvious? If you have to live that way, looking over your shoulder and making sure that you're doing whatever you can to maintain security for life, does it take some other toll in terms of that creative thing, which are the assets of a writer?
I mean, I think it did. You know, I think I can't avoid thinking that yes, there was damage, and there was a sort of a long period when I could not fire on all cylinders. You know, and I was very conscious of the fact at the time that I wrote the children's book, Haroon in the Sea of Stories. I mean, I was pleased with the way it turned out, but it was a small project. You know, it was because it was for children, there were other simplifications involved. I felt at that time that's as much as I can do. I could not at that stage have embarked on a big adult book like this. And so it's been, you know, it's been a hard road back for me.
And it completes a cycle for you.
It does, I feel. I mean, I certainly felt when I finished this, I mean, I felt that kind of excitement that writers feel when they know that you know, the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. I thought it was all right, this book, when I finished it. And I also thought that it finished something, you know, a kind of project for me. And a project which really I've been embarked on, as you mentioned, I mean, ever since, well, for 20 years, ever since I started writing Midnight Children.
Define the project for me. So, and where does this fit in that?
Well, I suppose, broadly speaking, it's the project to try and describe the world I came from and the world I came to, and how those two collided. You know, and a lot of people are saying to me, and it's interesting because I didn't think of it at the time, that Midnight Children, which is now 15 years old, and this book act like kind of bookends. And because they've been saying it, I've been trying to think what they meant. And the way I've come to understand it is that Midnight Children was a novel which I wrote really out of childhood, you know, out of the experience of being a child in Bombay, and the narrator of that novel, even though he grows up, retains a kind of childlike view of the world, and it's a novel about beginnings. It's a novel about something being born, a country and person, and so on. One of the things I like about the way this book turned out is I feel that this is not a child's view of India. It's not a child's view of Bombay. I feel that the Bombay in this book, the world of this book, comes out of the grown-up knowledge that I have of India and of this world.
It's interesting you say grown-up knowledge, because it is not coming out of a memory of an India that you have seen, or a Bombay that you have seen recently.
Well, not for a while, no. I haven't been there for almost 8 years, you know, and that also is very strange for me, because it's the first time in my life that I've spent that long without going to India, you know, I mean, ever. In 48 years, this is the only 8-year period which, you know, in which that's true. And so I find myself in the odd position of an exile, which I never expected to be. And now that the book is I mean, it's 7 or 8 months since I finished it, and it's been out a while, I look at it, and it seems to me as if that condition of exile gave the book like an extra emotional gear, you know, because I really needed India. I really needed it badly. I felt the loss of it very keenly, and, you know, I missed it. I missed my friends, and I missed the place. And this was the only way I could go there, you know, by creating it for myself. And I think that neediness in me has, I think, given a kind of emotional charge to this book.
Was it difficult because it was an India that had to come from memory and not from recent experience?
Well, I mean, it's difficult anyway, you know. Yeah. But I think no, because I think in that sense I discovered a truth of which many exiled writers have said before, which is that you carry it around with you. You know, I mean, it doesn't. The fact that you're not there doesn't mean that you don't have it. You know, I still feel that I possess India and can easily inhabit it. But I was very keen not to be told that I was out of touch. You know, I mean, that would have been for me, my Indian friends had got in touch and said, listen, Salman, you know, he's not like that
India
anymore.
has passed you by.
Yeah, you know, it's wrong. That was once true. It's not like that now. It's like this. I would have been deeply mortified. And so the fact that in India, the critics and the first readers of the book have really been, I mean, really eulogistically happy about the fact that the book is truthful about and depicts a world that they feel they live in. You know, that's a matter of great pride for me.
What is its publication status in India?
It's a strange thing. I mean, as you know, there was an objection raised by one extremist politician who believed himself to be satirized, which, you know, to be truthful, in part he's right.
Right.
You know,
yes.
Yeah. And I mean, what's true is that the character is based on a number of people. It is not just a portrait of him, but in part, that's right. And
he can find parts of himself in that character.
Sure. And I mean, I think, you know, satire, after all, is something he should well know about, since he started life as a satirist himself, as a political cartoonist. Anyway, because of this man's irritation with the book, the Indian government has done a very odd thing. I mean, they haven't done anything as extreme as ban the book. What they've done is to create a customs blockage. So they say, you know, we can't bring any more copies in. And when we say, why not, they say they're considering the advisability of allowing more copies in. And then we say, how long will it take them to consider? And they don't answer our letters. So this is a very Indian technique to kind of just tie something up in red tape and hope everybody forgets it. But
and are you without endeavor? Are you without resources to change that?
No, we can do something about it. I mean, I think already there's a kind of stink in India about it, and there's a legal procedure which the publishers of the book have embarked on to demand that the government shows cause why it's behaving like this. And the general view is that the government can't show cause. And we've also been given a number of nudges and winks from the government to suggest that actually the government would be rather pleased if the courts unbanned the book.
Yeah, but this man's political party now is in control of the state where Bombay lies.
Mm-hmm. But you see, it's interesting that, well, it's a coalition partner in the government. Right. And what's interesting is that their partners, the other sort of big Hindu party, the National Party, the BJP, has said that it would not support a ban even in Bombay. And without the BJP, they can't do it. You know? So we just have to solve the problem of this curious, very Indian blockage, which you can't call a ban. You see, if it was a ban, you could challenge it in court more easily. So this is it's a piece of Machiavellian behavior.
Explain the title, The Moor's Last Sigh.
Well, the title actually is a translation of a phrase in Spanish, El último suspiro del Moro, which is a tag attached to the story of the fall of Granada at the end of the Arab period in Spain. It is said that the last Sultan of Granada, on surrendering the Alhambra to Ferdinand and Isabella, the reconquering Catholic kings, sighed and wept, see, and as he departed into exile. And this moment, the end of Arab Spain and the weeping of the last Sultan, is known as the Moor's Last Sigh. So the story, that story, enters this novel, if you like, as a kind of metaphor for modern India and for the ruptures of cultures, not only in India, but in the modern world.
Yeah, and that's what I want to explore. Help me understand what you are, in a sense, in what way it is a metaphor for modern India.
Well, in what happened in the Arab period in southern Spain, in Andalusia, was that a kind of composite culture grew up, which was, although the Muslim sultans were the rulers, there were Christians and Jews and Muslims living side by side for hundreds of years, and their cultures affected each other. You know, so the Muslims were no longer completely Muslim, and likewise the others. And this composite culture of Andalusia is something which certainly in Spain, and people who know about it, you know, have always found very attractive. Out of it came great poetry and great architecture and so on. And then this was destroyed by what you might call Christian fundamentalism, you know, by the reconquering Catholic kings. Now, it seemed to me that the world I come from, India, the world this book comes out of, is also a composite culture. It's also a place where, okay, there's a Hindu majority, but there are many different cultures Hindu, Christian, Muslim, Jewish, etc., forming this kind of mélange, this kind of composite entity, which is the world I grew up in and which I found very rich and pleasurable and which I enjoy. Yeah, and there is a kind of threat to that composite culture now coming from a new kind of fundamentalism, which is basically Hindu fundamentalism, the fundamentalism of the majority.
And that's why they're upset at you.
And that's why they're upset, because I'm pointing this out, I guess, you know. But I have to say that it is not, as it were, most Hindus who are upset about this. It's the fanatic fringe. The book actually has had in India the best critical response and the best reader's response of any book I've written since Midnight's Children, and in many cases surpassing even that.
Yeah. Some might ask, did you have to write this?
Yeah, I had to write it.
I mean, did you have to take on more extremist?
I'm afraid I did. I mean, I think the truth is that, for me, I've always only written the books I had to write. You know, and I think I've always had the view that, you know, there are enough books. You know?
Yes.
I mean, it's really not
And so
necessary.
you should only write if you have something you have to write and something you have to say and something that you think makes a point.
If you can't avoid writing, that's the reason for writing. You know, if something drives you, impels you to give birth to it. You know,
so your answer as to why did you take on the Hindu extremist, your answer is I had no choice because I had something that was important to say about that culture that I love.
That's right.
And
I had
what
no
might
choice.
be happening to it.
Yes, and also, let me just say that that theme in this novel is not even the primary theme. I mean, this novel is, you know, I set out to write what you could loosely describe as a sex comedy. You know,
A sex comedy?
Yeah, I mean, this is a novel which I think, and I'm happy to say that people who read it seem to agree, is probably the funniest book I wrote.
Yeah, they do say that.
And one of the tasks I set myself at this was that I had always been very shy about sex in my writing. You know, I've always. You tend to find in my books that when the characters get to bed together, that there's a kind of fade out. You know,
and why is that?
Well, I think it actually is something about coming from India. People feel that it's difficult to talk openly about this stuff, you know, and I think I've always been delicate about depictions of love, you know, and I thought this time go for it. You know, this time you've got to find a way of doing it, and so. It was also to do with the fact that the character that came to me of Aurora, the main character in the novel, the painter, is, you know, she is a sexy lady. I mean, she is a very sensual woman. And I thought in order to represent her sensuality, in order to give that life in the novel, I couldn't duck it. I couldn't have dots and fade outs. I had to talk about it.
Yeah. Are you hopeful that you'll be able to return
to Bombay, to India? Yes, I'm hopeful. I mean, I wouldn't like to put a date on it, you know, because the worry I have about India is not a question of my personal safety, you know, because India is not Iran, and it's a different kind of place. The worry I have is that in the way that happened at the beginning of this whole crisis, one or two extremist politicians might seek to use my presence there to make political capital for themselves. And frankly, I've had a conflict
that is beyond you, but benefits them politically.
Yes, and I mean, I've had it up to here with being a political football, you know, and I just could not bear to become the tool of some politician, you know, again. And my worry about going back to India is that would happen. Now, particularly, I think this year there's a problem because this is a general election year in India. So I think at the moment it would be stupid to go because everybody's looking for angles, you know. My feeling is that I will let the election happen, which will be sort of sometime between now and the middle of the year, and I'll see how that pans out and let the dust settle, and then maybe.
What are you saying about religious fanaticism?
Well, I'm saying it's a growing force, you know.
Throughout this world.
Throughout the world, and I mean, you know, the novel's about India, but it's not only about India, I hope. I mean, I hope that people who read it here will feel that there are echoes in their own experience which they can feed into what's happening in this book. I mean, there's religious fanaticism here. I've often thought that, you see, Americans, in a way, although America and India are so unlike, so far apart, you know, one is so rich, the other is so poor, etc. Nevertheless, I think the cultures in many ways can recognize each other. You know, well, because they're both cultures made up of mixtures. They're both cultures made up of people who come from elsewhere and who kind of transform themselves and make themselves again here. They're both cultures of mixed up people.
They're both cultures with a connection to England.
They're both ex-colonial cultures.
Yeah, exactly.
There's that, yes, there's that too. And, you know, they both have these great rotting cities, you know, that populate my books.
They both have extremes of poverty and wealth.
That's right. So, I mean, I would have hoped that an American reader coming to this, even if they don't know anything about India, you know, can say, oh, well, that's not so unlike, you know, my own neighborhood.
What is it, and this is not part of this, but I have friends that I know who have traveled to the Middle East, you know, both as journalists and as observer, people just going because they wanted to soak up, learn, experience a culture. They come away with something that I can't describe any more than saying the magic of India. What is it?
Well, I think India is an assault on your senses. You know, when you go to India, India is not a low-key country. India is a country with the volume control turned up to maximum, you know,
Yes,
with the smell control turned up to maximum, the field of vision, everything is excess.
Yeah.
You know, it's that thing that India overwhelms you. The sights of it, the sounds of it, the smells of it, the taste of it, the touch, the feel of it, you know. And people who are not Indian who go there, they either loathe it, they either have a really strong revulsion against it, it's too much for them, you know, or they fall in love and they can never see the world the same way again.
You're right. What about violence in the culture?
Well, it's there. It's there. And I mean, I think one of the things that I tried to face in this book was the nature of that violence, because I mean, I hope this is a very comic novel, but underneath the comedy there is...
sexual novel.
Yeah, but underneath it, there's no question, a layer of darkness. And that darkness has to do with what you say about the violence in the culture. Because every so often in India, there are outbreaks of extraordinary, hyperbolic acts of violence. And if you come from there, and if that's, you know, you define yourself in part as being from there, you want to say, where does that come from in us? You know, and I think it's not enough to say, oh, it's just those violent guys over there who did that. Because I think you have to say that we are capable of this too, and where in us does this come from? And in this novel, what happens to the narrator, who is not a violent person, is that he becomes at one point a very violent person. And that happens in the novel because I wanted to face that fact, that the violence is in us too.
How much of this story, and some will make this point in reviews, this is in part your story, your experiences, in some translatable way over the last few years?
I mean, I would say it's not really. I mean, what I would say is that if every time you use a first-person narrator, as I've done in this book, then inevitably a chunk of your experience and your attitudes and your feelings and passions will come out through his mouth and will come out through his experience. That's true. I mean, I do not deny that. That is true about this book. However, he ain't me, you know. And I think it's often the case when writers have used point of view characters in a very intimate way, you know, that there is an attempt to associate them, you know, and yet Bello is not Herzog, you know.
Yeah, right, I know. But at the same time, it is possible, and you touched on this, that he's more you than you realize.
It's entirely possible, but I would say he's not the only person in this book who's a bit me. Because I think the character of Aurora, the painter, even though she's a girl, you know, I think she has some of my ideas.
Like what?
Well, the kind of painter she is a little bit the kind of writer I would like to be. Which is, you know, that's to say she's an encyclopedic painter. She tries to put the world on her canvas. You know,
and so do you here and in everything you write. In a sense, you're trying to put almost everything you have learned and can connect. I mean, your own intellectual voyage in there.
I think this is, I mean,
right?
Yes.
Yes. And the genius that people attribute to you, are the best skills, is that you do it with a certain a verbal dexterity, you know, that defines you as a great writer.
Well, I mean, I think I am very happy with the language in this book, you know, and I think I've always tried to find a very fluid language, which can, amongst other things, which can make very quick transitions from comedy to tragedy, you know, from kind of danger to comfort, you know, so that the reader is kept a little off balance about whether he should laugh or cry. And I feel in this book the language does work well for me.
What are the lessons of, for the lack of a better word, since you received that death sentence, what have been the lessons that might even in part be here, but certainly are part of you here in your head and in your soul and in your heart?
Well, there's quite a few, I guess. And I mean, it's true to say that some of them are in this book. I mean, there's an idea about fear, for instance, which the narrator expresses, where he says, with fear, it's all or nothing. You know, that you either surrender to it, in which case you sit in a corner and gibber, or else you simply put it away, you know, and then you get on with your life.
You can't go halfway on
you
that
cannot
equation.
No, it's either or with fear.
Yeah.
You know, and that's clearly something that I've learned. I mean, there are other things I've learned, which is that some of the values that I've always most cared about, you know, the values of we were talking about earlier, pluralism and multiplicity and being many things and not being narrow, not defining yourself or your culture narrowly, that can also lead to great weakness, you know, to great weakness of purpose. You know, so that one way of interpreting the story we were talking about, the story of the fall of Granada, is that here is this wonderful, pluralist, civilized culture, and when it's faced with this narrow spectrum, you know, obsessive, very focused fundamentalist attack, it disintegrates, gives up without a fight, doesn't have a chance. You know? And I think if these are the ideas that we care about, freedom, tolerance, living side by side with difference and so on, we must also understand how they can create weakness. And therefore, you know, by understanding that, it may give us a way of guarding against that attack, that intolerant, narrow spectrum, vicious attack.
Yeah. Someone made this point, so I can't take credit for it. It is that somehow by probing the depths, what you have seen is the most humane aspects also.
I think it's true that and I've tried to say it whenever I could, that the upside, if you like, of what happened to me is that people behaved incredibly well towards me and around me. That as well as all the evil and darkness and anger and etc. that was aimed at me, the other thing that was aimed at me was affection and love and commitment and solidarity and support and courage and you know, unflinching and unwavering determination to confront this thing and etc. And that wasn't just my friends, you know, that was people I didn't know. It was people who came together to form campaigns and to defend the values that, you know, that they felt were threatened in this case. And I think an awful lot of people behaved heroically. You know, ordinary men and women in bookshops who had to be on the front line of the threat. You know, continued in the most determined way to say, we will not get scared about this.
And some paid with their lives too.
And that's right. There were attacks on people. 2 or 3 that I know of. Yeah, there were attacks on people. There were bombs, etc. And yet, an enormous community of people stood up against this threat. You know, and I think that's very admirable.
How do you appraise how you behaved?
I think what I would say is that initially I was very off balance, and I think it took me a long time to blunder around, you know, if you like, and do the wrong things and bump into the furniture and fall over and hit my nose against the wall, and until I learned how to face this thing. You know, I think very few of us would be familiar with how to confront threats such as this, and certainly I was not. And I would say the first couple of years of this thing were years that I would describe in this way, that they were full of false starts and confusions and bewilderments.
Almost from some combination of being paralyzed and unable to find your footing.
Yeah, I mean, I think what happens in a situation as extreme as this is that your picture of the world is broken. You know, and when that happens, you don't quite know how to act for the best. You don't know what is a right act and what is a wrong act. Should you mollify people? Should you defy people? Should you appease people? Should you fight back against people? You know, and everybody's giving you advice. You know, and everybody has their point of view and knows exactly what you should do. And it's confusing. It's confusing.
You don't find the right point. I mean, is there a right point to find between, I mean, I think of somebody like Nathan Sharansky. You remember when he was released from, and he, having been in the Gulag at the time, he walked back and he deliberately zigzagged as a last act of defiance, because the KGB had said to him, "You'll walk right over there," and he wanted to say, "One last time, I shall defy you." You know,
well, good for him.
Good for him, but it is that act of somehow, you know, I mean.
Well, I think you do. I think I found my way to clarity in this matter. You know, I think for a long time, the trouble is one wants to be liked. You know, you write a book, a lot of people say, "We hate you," and there's an immediate tendency to say, "But you're wrong, guys." You know, and if I could just explain it to you, if you just listen to me for a minute, I'll explain it to you, you will realize that you're just wrong. You know, I'm not a bad guy, I'm a good guy.
Yeah.
And you have that desire to do that. And one of the things I had to learn was that that was a mistake. You know, that actually what was aimed against me was not something to appease. It was not something to try and befriend. You know, and I learned that the hard way by making the mistakes.
Yeah. Because, and for other reasons, it had an irrationality that you couldn't even deal with.
Yes, you couldn't face it because they were not listening.
Yeah.
You know, and so eventually I thought, okay, I accept the fact that there are people out there who don't like me, and the issue here is not to make them my friends, but to win this fight. And at that point, I became a lot clearer about what had to be done.
Do you, in issues like this, I mean, you became a kind of poster person, poster boy, poster child for artistic freedom.
Yeah.
Yes?
I guess so.
You did.
Yeah.
You know, and does your case become so consuming that every other issue less significant?
No. In fact, that's again a thing that I found my way to, that I felt more and more that the importance of this issue, including to me, importance to me, but also to everybody else, you know, who was engaged in this, was not just that it was me and my book, you know, but that it was, as you say, representative of a larger conflict. And I began more and more to find out about that larger conflict and to become involved with these other cases and other fights, you know, so that, I mean, for instance, in Europe, I'm now the head of a writers' organization which exists specifically in order to help out other persecuted writers and actually find them safe havens if they need it, and so on and so on. I mean, I felt that one of the things that was incumbent on me to do, because so much was done for me, you know, is to put some of that back, if possible, and I have been trying to do that.
I think Martin Amis said this, that what had been stolen from you is a writer's most important asset, the purity of a response to your work. Yes. Your work, at least now, will be judged in a context, not just for what's in this book.
Yeah, Martin did say that, and I think it was a shrewd remark, like many of his remarks. And I remember he had used a wonderful phrase when the fatwa first happened. He described me as having vanished into the front page. Yeah. And I have been trying to emerge from that front page, you know, ever since, to become visible again. And you're right, that, I mean, people have tended to try and find in my work, you know, echoes of this or that. This or that aspect of my life.
Right.
But I must say that, and it's one of the greatest thrills for me of the way in which this book has been published and has been received, is that in the end, actually, this is not what people have done with this book. You know, the book has somehow imposed itself on people's imaginations so that in the end, they can say, yeah, there's something to do with Rushdie in here, you know, but in the end, what they like about the book is itself. Yeah. And I feel that something important has been gained, and I do feel that as a kind of victory in this matter.
So you think, in a sense, you have been able to overcome, or the critics have been able to overcome all of the context that this could be placed in,
mostly,
and judge it?
For the most part, yeah. And I think readers, too, I mean, which is more important than critics, are beginning to do that. You know, that I felt that the thing that happened to me with the fatwa was that it actually seriously damaged my reputation as a writer. Because, I mean, in spite of all these sort of symbolic aspects that you mentioned, it made many people think that I must be, as I was accused of being, a bad, arrogant, unreadable, turgid, theological, polemical, you know, who needs it writer.
Right.
It did, in spite of this colossal fame that came my way, this was negative fame. It was bad fame. It did not make people more anxious to go out and read my work. It made them less anxious to go out and read my work. And I have had to overcome that.
So for anybody who wants to step forward and say, boy, if I could draw that much attention in my book, I'd be prepared to walk in his moccasins. Yeah. You're prepared to say, don't even think a second.
Don't even think about it.
There is no benefit.
There was not. I mean, you know, if there had been, I would say so. But there, actually, it was the opposite. I've had to. It's as if the characteristics of the people who attacked me, their humorlessness, their bigotry, and so on, were dumped on me. I must be like that too if they're so angry with me. Was a general view, and one of the great things about the reception of this novel is that it's as if it has rejoined me to my previous self as a writer.
Someone said, and I give credit, I think maybe the Washington Post, but I may be wrong, said in the opening line, we tend to forget that Salman Rushdie, because of all this, is one of our greater writers, or something to that effect.
Yeah, something very nice.
Very nice like that. But it is this context question, which you think, in a sense, you may be beginning to...
Yeah, I think all I can do, the only way I can fight it is to go on writing my books. You know, and if they are good books, and if they please their readers, then gradually the Satanic Verses will just be one amongst many, you know. And I think already, if you think about it, the Satanic Verses was the 5th book I published. This is the 10th book.
Yes.
Gradually, it's that novel that is being set in a larger context.
A couple of things about that experience there. Did you become a Muslim?
No, this is what we're talking about, blundering around into the furniture. At one point, when I tried to appease this thing that was coming at me, I flirted with that and immediately felt sick with myself. You know, I just thought, I think it is the worst mistake I ever made. And if it's over 5 years ago now, and I'm still, as it were, explaining why it happened. But it was something I rather rapidly realized was a bad blunder and born of desperation and so on, and not true, you know, which is the worst thing.
When were you the most fearful?
I mean, I think right at the beginning.
At the beginning.
I mean, right
there. Because you didn't know if you could even survive it.
Nobody.
There's nobody you could go to and say, "What is it like to live in this?"
Yeah. And I must say, I have to tell you, I did not expect to survive it.
You did not.
No. I mean,
you knew that one day, somewhere, somebody was laying in wait.
Well, I thought maybe not even someday. I mean, at the time that I first heard about the threat, it did instill in me the thought that I might not have more than a few days left to live.
So what did you do?
Well, didn't feel very good about it. But what I did, actually, was on that day, was go to my friend Bruce Chatwin's memorial service. And I remember Paul Theroux sitting in the chair behind me and saying, "I guess we'll be here for you next week." And I mean, he was making a joke, which was, you know, it's characteristic black comedy of his. But I thought it just slightly missed the mark of the tone of the day.
Yes.
I felt. But I mean, I think I genuinely felt at that time that, you know, there is not much time left.
Where do you think it is today?
It's very hard to judge. I mean, what I feel is that there is a colossal change in the atmosphere. And one part of that is that I think as far as the mass of, you know, Muslims and the Muslim community in different countries is concerned, I really think this is not a problem anymore. I mean, one of the reasons why I began to do advertised and open public events again in England when the book came out, around Europe, is because I had this very strong sense, very strong belief that that aspect really was not a problem. And so it was proved. I mean, that's to say there were no protests. Indeed, many of the audiences contained large numbers of Muslim readers, and they were very keen to meet me. And, you know, so something was healed there. I mean, some rift in the world, you know, was healed. And so what remains is the issue of the government of Iran. Now, for the last year, the Iranians have been making very mollifying noises about this. Yeah. They've been endlessly saying, no, we're not going to do anything about it. We don't want to kill him. We're not going to. We haven't tried to.
But we will not.
But we will not, so far, cancel the fatwa. And so this is clearly not an acceptable situation. I mean, one has to say that it is a major shift in their language. Because until a year ago, they were saying yes, they would go on and kill me.
What was the impact of your meeting with the president? Do you think that did any good? Did it send a message that might not have been as total as a message you'd like to have sent, which would be picking up the phone and say, would you please stop this?
Yeah, I think it made quite a difference, you know, and I think in a number of ways. I think, first of all, it was a very clear demonstration of policy and feeling by the most powerful man in the world and the leader of the most powerful nation in the world. I mean, I think that really is significant. It's significant if only because it really stiffened the sinews and the spines of the European countries. You know, once President Clinton had met with me, suddenly it was cool to meet me, you know. I mean, there was a point at which it had been uncool to meet me, and it suddenly became cool. Suddenly they were queuing up to have their picture taken with me.
To say I've been on your side all the time, exactly. I was there with you. And
yes, and since then, the European Union's policy in this matter has toughened considerably, and they are now engaged in a campaign of pressurizing Iran into coming to a solution of the matter, and that has happened, if you like, in the wake of the meeting that I had in the White House, not only with the president, but also with Warren Christopher and Anthony Lake. And I do feel that that was helpful.
Do you think on some journey between 0 and 100, where are you think, in terms of...
I mean, my mood shifts about this, but I think on the whole, I would have said, you know, we maybe 80, you know.
That's what I think.
That's what I think. I mean, I think there are some steps that need to be taken. But I do think...
By you or by others or in combination?
Well, you see, I've always thought there's two roads in this. And one of them is what the steps that I take, and the other is the kind of political process. Right. Now, the political process is really not any longer for me to do much about except to go on pressurizing. But that, of course, must end up in the end with Iran renouncing these threats. I mean, that's the goal, and we're not there yet. So at the same time, I've embarked on a road back into the world, and the biggest step in that to date has been to step back into public. You know, it's not endlessly to be a surprise or unannounced guest, but to say, you know, I'm doing a reading next Thursday. Would you like to come and buy some tickets, and I'll read you a bit from my book. Now, the fact that I've done that a lot in England and in Europe, that feels like a very significant shift to me.
So you would have no fear, or at least you would have no reservation about appearing for a public reading at a bookstore in New York City on this tour?
I would not.
You would do that if opportunity was offered to do that?
Oh, certainly, yes.
Yeah. Because my impression was not that. Then somehow there was still a kind of level of, we've got to be very careful about this, and we don't want to be somewhere where somebody will have time if they know.
Well, all I can say is we've done it in England and Europe.
Right,
you
that's
know, and so there is a precedent for it. Now, in fact, very recently, because I've just been more or less around the world, I went to South America and Australia and so on. In South America, Carlos Fuentes and I did a kind of event at the big Guadalajara book fair. Yeah. And, you know, that was well known. I was on TV the night before, talking about it. I was in the newspapers on the morning of the thing. I mean, 1,500 people were there. It was fine.
One last question about that. Do you know if anybody tried and failed?
I know that they didn't get close, but I know that in the first 3 years, let's say, that there were a number of attempts, yes. And I mean, I have this on the say-so of the British authorities, who told me that there had been, on various occasions, told me that there were, in their view, attempts in train. The last time I heard seriously about an attempt was around the time of the Gulf War. At that point, there was apparently a very serious attempt. A contract had been put out and accepted. And in these years, quite a large number of Iranians, I can't remember exactly how many, but over a couple of dozen, have been expelled from Britain from time to time on a national security basis. And I've been told several times that those people many of those people who were expelled were, in the opinion of the government, in the country for reasons connected with the Iranian fatwa.
What's next for you?
Well, more books, I hope.
Yeah. But is there one underway that...
There's one just beginning. And my own feeling has been for some time, as I said, that I felt this was the sort of culmination and completion of a project of work. Right. I'd quite like to go somewhere really different next time, somewhere kind of really surprising. I might even write a novel about America. You never know.
All right, thank you very much. Salman Rushdie's novel, The Moor's Last Sigh, about, in which he touches on many subjects and brings them together in his unique style. Thank you very much. A pleasure to have you here.
Thanks.
My thanks to Salman Rushdie. When we come back, geologist, zoologist, paleontologist, scientist, essayist, Stephen Jay Gould.